What's up, CrossFit NOLA? This week's movement breakdown, we are going to talk about the push-up. Push-up is one of my favorite movements because you do not need much equipment to do it, and it is very effective. The reason we really need to make sure we are performing the push-up correctly is because this movement is one of the few that gives us the chance to strengthen our horizontal press, which we don't get to do as often because a lot of the movements we perform finish with that vertical press. When we're talking about our wall balls, thrusters, push presses, handstand push-ups. So this one, now we get that chance to strengthen a new movement pattern, which makes it very important that we're doing it correctly. So in this video, we're gonna talk about the range of motion, the positions we need to make sure we're in, the flaws and how to fix them, ways to modify, and then also ways to vary the movement to even get a little more out of it. So now that we talked about why the push-up is so important, now we're gonna get into the range of motion and positioning of the push-ups. So where the movement starts, where it ends, and where our body should be positioned as we go through each rep. So the first thing I'm gonna talk about is our starting position and our ending position. So our starting position is going to be at the top, shoulders over the wrists, arms extended. We're going down all the way to the floor as our chest touches the ground, and then it finishes arms locked out at the top. First, let's talk about where our hands are gonna be placed, and then we'll talk about where our feet are gonna be placed. Notice when I'm here, my hands are on the floor, but my fingers are pointed forward. And as I go down, my elbows are going to come back. And then behind me, you'll see my feet are together. So, few reasons for this. My hands are pointed forward. This is a much better position on my shoulder. A lot of times we'll see that elbow come out wide, which we're gonna talk about later. So we want those fingers pointed forward because not only is this a safer position for our shoulder, but this is also the position we do a majority or all of our other presses from. So when we press the barbell overhead, when we press out of a handstand push-up, so it translates better. So not a position, but it's a position that's gonna translate to other movements and help us perform there with our presses. Feet together, another important element of the push-up is the midline. So we're talking about that plank position. So if I have my feet together, now my abs, lower back are all forced to engage to support that plank. And that's what we want. If we're getting our plank through that wide base, we're disengaging our abs. So that's why we wanna make sure our feet are together. Now we're gonna talk about a lot of the common flaws that we see with athletes performing this movement. The first flaw we're gonna talk about is gonna be what a lot of people will call the chicken wing. And it can happen with one or two or a combination of these factors. The hands being too wide and the fingers facing in. And what that rep is gonna kind of look like if you see someone doing a chicken wing style push-up is this. Their hands go too wide, their fingers come in. So even if everything else is the way we want, feet together, tight midline, as they go down, this position is gonna naturally force my elbows to drift out. And then as I press up, what that's doing, it's disengaging from the chest and it's putting a lot of pressure on the front delt, which is not what we want out of the push-up. So when we talk about breaking the midline, it can happen in two spots. It can happen at the bottom or the top. So let me give you an example of it happening at the top and then it happening at the bottom. So if it happens at the top, it's very easy to see. The hips are gonna sag, there's no tightness in the core, and then as they go down, it looks like this, and notice the chest never touched the floor. It's just the belly. This usually happens in a workout that's like for time, and an athlete's trying to move very quickly. So you might see a lot of push-ups look like this. We call them the Cindy push-ups. Here, that's not really a push-up. You're not getting your chest down to the floor. The flaw is like when we lose our midline on the floor is when it comes here. Because remember, the range of motion is down and up. So we're holding that tension throughout every repetition. So as I go down, it's chest and then up. But this is what we see a lot of. Down, the exhale where we break the midline, and then the press up. And that's usually what we call the snake push-up. Or even if you don't snake, if you go down, exhale, break your midline, and then come up, still not where we want to be. Because remember, we're holding that tension and keeping our positions throughout each and every rep. Down, up, then rest. Another common flaw we see is poor range of motion. And this can affect athletes who either don't quite have the strength to perform the movement, or once again, are trying to perform the movement too quickly. And these are a few of the most common examples we see of missing the range of motion. First being no part of the chest or belly touching the floor, but just letting the face get close to the floor. And what that would look like is this. So you'll see nothing here is getting to the floor. Even if every other position's correct, we still have to make sure we get that range of motion. The next miss of range of motion we see is sometimes when athletes purposely break that midline in order to go faster throughout their rep. So what that looks like is this. The chest is never touching the floor. They're purposely creating this arch in their lower back to shorten the repetition and move faster. The third example of a poor range of motion is just holding everything in place and either not getting low enough or not locking out at the top. So not getting low enough would look like this. It can be just there, even if you get there, or not locking out at the top. So everything is exactly where we want it. We go down, chest touch to the floor, but we're not quite locking the arms out. So now that we've talked about some of the common flaws we see, we're gonna talk about how to fix them. So we have the chicken wing, and then we have the loss of the midline and belly touching the floor. The fix to these all kind of comes down to body awareness. So being aware of where we're at in our setup. So when we get set up at the top, to fix the chicken wing, let's make sure those fingers are not pointed forward because that's gonna force the elbows back, or make sure those fingers are not pointed in. We want those fingers pointed forward to allow those elbows to track back. And then once again, creating that awareness, we make sure we have that tight midline to let my chest touch the ground, because if we don't have that awareness and the belly comes down, that's gonna cause that belly to touch the floor. So have that body awareness to establish fingers forward, allowing the elbows to track back, tight midline. As I go down, my chest touches the floor, arms locked out at the top. The best way to fix that and know that you have that awareness is gonna be to slow the rep down. Start slowing down your push-ups, create that body awareness, and then we'll start adding speed and intensity after that. Once we've established our body awareness to go throughout the push-up, if we're still not meeting those points of performance, it's because of poor range of motion, and this is gonna be a tactile fix. So making sure you're giving yourself an objective point of reference to say whether or not it is a rep. And those points are what we talked about. Chest touching the floor, arms locked out. So if we don't have the upper body strength to go through that, we'll talk about that in the modifications, but always make sure you're giving yourself an objective reference to count it as a rep. So there's contact in the bottom, arms locked out at the top. If you're not feeling you're hitting one or both of those points, same thing, slow the rep down. Once we start getting good, proper, slow reps, the next step is when we start adding speed and intensity to the movement. How to modify the push-up. So if you're an athlete that doesn't quite have the upper body strength to go through that full range of motion, hitting all of those positions and points we talked about, we need to make sure we're modifying it to build that strength. I'm gonna go over two ways to modify it. Both are good and they're both kind of different, and I would recommend to utilize both. The first is gonna be to perform the push-up from your knees. And if we're doing that, we're gonna have our knees on the floor, but what I want you to not do, which we see a lot of, is I don't want the hip to be over the knee. So we don't want to be here. I actually want your knees behind your hips. And from this position, everything else stays the same. Fingers forward, elbows back, chest to the ground, arms locked out at the top. So what this one does is it allows us to press from the same angle, but getting on our knees, it kind of takes away some of our body weight. The one con to this movement is it does remove the plank element from the push-up, but it does allow us to get the press And then we can also do separate core movements to develop the core strength and then combine that to help us complete the push-up the way we want. The second modification, which I like for the push-ups, is gonna be to use some type of surface for elevation. So here I have the bench. The higher the surface, the more assistance you're giving yourself. The lower the surface, the less assistance you're giving yourself. But hands on top, same thing. Everything remains the same. Fingers forward, elbows back, feet together, chest to the surface, and then arms locked out at the top. The benefit to this one is it keeps that plank involved in the movement. However, it changes the angle of the press. And the stronger you get here, you would just lower and lower and lower that surface over time until our hands are onto the floor. But make sure whatever you're using, your chest is still making contact. Thank you guys for listening to this week's movement breakdown. Don't forget to go to CrossFitNola.com to get our daily workouts. Go to our YouTube channel to get the briefings for those workouts. And then also, very importantly, under this video, I want you guys to send me a video of you trying to do your best push-up unmodified. By seeing it unmodified, even if it's not meeting everything we talked about, it'll give us as coaches a chance to see where things are breaking down and let you know how to fix those individual spots and positions to down the road improve that push-up where we are meeting all of those standards, points of performance, and getting the most out of our push-ups. So catch you guys later, post your videos, and then look forward to next week's movement breakdown and all the other content we're throwing out.